So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this press briefing in the room and online by our speaker today, Mr. Tom Andrews, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar. The Special Rapporteur, who is an independent expert for the United Nations, is in New York for the presentation of his report to the UN General Assembly's Third Committee. The annual Third Committee addresses issues of social development as well as human rights. We will begin with a few remarks from the expert and then open up for questions. Mr. Andrews, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Am I able to be heard? Is this?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm grateful for your participation today, your interest in Myanmar that has become the invisible crisis. So it is always very welcome to try to make what has been mostly invisible in the world more visible. And I have been pleased to present to the Third Committee of the UN General Assembly about the basic facts of Myanmar and how things continue to deteriorate and how the international community's response to this crisis has failed. I'd like to talk just a bit about some of those indicators of developments in the country and why this is a problem that cannot be ignored. The humanitarian conditions in Myanmar are significantly worse this year than when I reported them to the United Nations last year. Nearly 22 million people in Myanmar now require humanitarian aid. 16.7 million people face acute food insecurity. Now, this was all made much worse back on the 28th of March, when a 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck central Myanmar. The earthquake impacted an estimated 17 million people, damaged 157,000 buildings, left about 200,000 people homeless. The World Bank has estimated that it caused $11 billion in damage. The military junta of Myanmar took that natural disaster and turned it into a humanitarian catastrophe. They did so by trying to turn this disaster to its own advantage. It blocked systematically the delivery of humanitarian aid from reaching many devastated areas in Myanmar. It employed tactics such as threatening, harassing, interrogating, extorting humanitarian aid workers. It confiscated medical supplies. Its soldiers looted the homes of those who were displaced by the earthquake. They rounded up young people involved in relief efforts, forcibly conscripting them into the military to become human shields while otherwise using them as forced labor. And despite declaring a post-earthquake ceasefire, there were actually more aerial attacks by the military junta against civilian targets after the earthquake than before the earthquake. There were more, in fact, aircraft and drone strikes on civilian targets the month following than any other month in the first half of 2025. And the second quarter of 2025 saw more airstrikes on civilian targets than any previous quarter since the coup. What is so incredible about what's happening in Myanmar is that things continue to worsen, and the military junta is continuing to escalate its attacks using sophisticated weapons of war to attack civilian targets. And this is all happening before our very eyes. According to the World Food Program, 57% of families in Central Rakhine State cannot meet their basic food needs. This is a dramatic increase from the 33% that reported a similar food challenge in December of last year. For 4 years, the junta has attacked healthcare workers and infrastructure that has led, predictably, to dire health conditions in Myanmar. In the first 8 months of 2025, there were 169 recorded attacks on the healthcare system, including attacks on medical facilities and the killing, kidnapping and arrest of health workers. So there is a bad situation that has become exponentially worse over the course of this 4 years since the coup, 4 years plus since the coup, and certainly since my last report to the UN General Assembly. But it's a crisis that does not only affect the people of Myanmar. This crisis impacts the entire regions. Millions of people have been escaping over the border into Bangladesh, into Thailand, into Malaysia, and well beyond. The criminality of this junta has created an environment in which extraordinary criminality and criminal acts are affecting people not only in the region but all over the world. Young people are drawn into the promise of good jobs, find themselves trafficked into scam centers, imprisoned, and forced to scam people literally out of billions of dollars all over the world. So this is a crisis that is not only impacting the people of Myanmar, it is indeed impacting the people around the world. I am here to implore the members of the United Nations to step up and take action that it has simply failed to do. We have seen in the midst of this spike in the need for of incredible needs for humanitarian aid, we have seen a systematic decrease in the availability of humanitarian aid. So this juxtaposition of one arrow going this way of increasing needs, another arrow going the other way of reductions in the availability of aid from the United Nations makes this an extraordinarily horrific situation, and it's only getting worse because the humanitarian conditions are getting worse and the availability of support from the international community, that is getting worse, and that is just a complete disaster. Those targeted to receive humanitarian aid from these United Nations is being reduced from 6.7 million to 4.8 million. And this is less than a quarter of the 22 million who are in need right now. The World Food Program is cutting food assistance to 1 million people in Myanmar, including 100,000 people in Rakhine State whose only source of food, whose only source of survival is the World Food Program. So you have this horrific situation made worse by the diabolical steps being taken, the massive airstrikes and civilian attacks on civilians by the military junta, and the neglect of the international community, and the reduction of aid and support from the United Nations, which is creating a significant disaster. Those were my messages to the Third Committee of the UN General Assembly yesterday. Those are my messages as I engage in bilateral meetings with representatives here in New York at UN headquarters. And it is a message that I'm going to be continuing on in the weeks and months to come because we need to change course. There's just too much at stake. Now, yesterday in the session, I had many questions that surrounded various aspects of this crisis. And one of them, which I thought was very important, in fact, repeated by several members, was the question of the elections that have been scheduled in Myanmar for the 28th of December. And I made it as clear as I possibly could that these elections are a sham. They're a fraud. You cannot have a free and fair election when you arrest, detain, imprison, and torture the leaders of the political opposition. When you dissolve 40 political parties, including the National League for Democracy, that won overwhelming victories in the last 2 election cycles. When it is illegal for journalists to report the truth of conditions in Myanmar, when it is illegal to criticize the junta and indeed criticize these elections. There are right now 22,000 people who are in prison right now because of any of these infractions. They are political prisoners, and they're behind bars as these elections are being planned and scheduled to begin on the 28th of October. I was very pleased that this week ASEAN met to discuss, among other things, this so-called election. They have made a very clear statement about their views of the election, that they believe that elections should not move forward as long as the violence in Myanmar continues. Stopping the violence was the first point of ASEAN's 5-point consensus, a point that has been consistently violated by the military junta, and ASEAN has made it clear that you should not begin elections until the violence ends. I am urging that member states follow the lead of ASEAN, take clear, unequivocal statements against these elections as anything other than illegitimate, and that at the very least, do not send election observers into Myanmar when this fraudulent exercise begins in late December. I have served on election observation missions. I can tell you that nothing positive will be a result of those election observers. They'll see nothing that we don't already know, and that is this is a sham. And what would be a very bad development would be to have them be a party to the junta's attempt to create a sense of legitimacy around these elections. So I'm hoping that in the next several weeks, the election again will be in just the end of December. Member states will take firm and clear positions. Before I complete my opening remarks, let me just say that one of the questions that came up, and in these sessions you have very limited amount of time to respond to all questions and comments, so you're restricted that way. But there was one comment that came from India in which I simply did not have time to address the concern that was raised by the representative from India, and he looked at my report and he criticized my report when it referenced India, and said that I was making unsubstantiated claims about India and what was developing and is developing in India. And I just want to say, for the record, that I have personally researched and substantiated the claims that I have made about developments in India with respect to refugees inside of India. And I'm speaking, for example, of 40 Rohingya refugees that were rounded up in Delhi, that were put on military aircraft and then a military ship sent out into the sea, taken close to an island off of Myanmar. The 40 were beaten, they were harassed, they were given life jackets, and they were put into the sea to make their way to the shoreline. This is a credible report. This is a substantiated report, and I have written a formal inquiry to the government of India concerning this issue. I have met with a representative from India concerning this issue. I've been told that India would be looking into this issue and this broader range of concerns that I have raised. I have yet to hear back from India with respect to any of their findings on this issue. So I just want to clarify for the record that issue that was raised with respect to allegedly unsubstantiated claims, I'm here to tell you they are substantiated. And whatever is missing, I invite the government of India to finally respond and provide me with any information that they may have with respect to this and related incidents of refugees inside of India. And with that, I would be very happy to answer any questions that there may be on the floor or any questions that there may be online. And I know, by the way, we're at a distinct disadvantage because many people in Asia are asleep. So this will be available via tape delay. But anyway, I appreciate your attention and your participation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Andrews. Any questions in the room? Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry for coming late, but I was listening upstairs and ran down. Farnoosh Shamiri with the Associated Press. I wanted to ask, first of all, and if you already mentioned this, I apologize, about the China broker truce. Do you see that as becoming more common and as, as an effective way to begin to move past the current phase of clashes and fighting in Myanmar? And then secondly, you talked a lot about the international community, seeing the death and destruction of this group of people as invisible and not paying as much attention to it as the many other devastating humanitarian crises and wars that are happening right now. Why do you think that is? And when you have had conversations with member states, including those who can influence this situation, what have you heard back from them about what they can and will do in response?
Two great questions. First of all, with respect to China, any attempts, any measures that can be taken, any efforts that can be made to try to stop the killing, of course, are very, very welcome. That's the first point of the 5-point consensus of ASEAN. And the killings have continued, particularly on civilian targets. I know that China has been working in its neighborhood. Obviously, it has a great deal at stake with Myanmar being its neighbor. The instability on that border is not in anyone's interest, including China and Chinese businesses and others. So trying to create stability is obviously something that's very important. But what's, I think, also important is for us to stop the killing throughout all of Myanmar. And I think the way to do that is to reduce the capacity of the junta to commit these crimes, to use these sophisticated weapons of war to kill innocent people. And those attacks have been escalating. There are three things that the junta needs to sustain these attacks in itself: money, weapons, and legitimacy. The elections, that's the legitimacy part. But in terms of weapons, efforts by the international community, I've done 3 reports on how the junta is getting its weapons and its money, and who are the sources of those weapons, and how can we stop them. Russia is the number 1 source. China is the number 2 source. And I was criticized by a representative from China for including China as a reference in light of other efforts that are being made. And I was accused of, in his words, vilifying normal weapons trade. Why am I vilifying normal weapons trade? And what I am vilifying is the use of sophisticated weapons of war to kill innocent people, to strike civilian targets. And that's why I believe it's extremely important for us to not just address skirmishes, outbreaks in one part of the country, but to systematically deny the junta the ability to make these attacks on civilians anywhere in the country. Now, in my report, Banking on the Death Trade, I listed again in order: Russia, China, Singapore came in at number 3 as the 3rd source. I believe it was $64 million worth of weapons and materials coming through Singapore into the junta. When I did that, Singapore's response was to launch an investigation. I was happy to fly to Singapore to help with the investigation. They completed the investigation, they took action, and as a result, there was a 90% 90 drop in weapons transfers through Singapore to the military junta. Overall, because of actions that have been taken by some member states, the flow of weapons and weapons materials to Myanmar has dropped by 1/3. What we need to do is to get everyone on this train, stopping the flow of these sophisticated weapons of war that are killing innocent people. Why are member states not stepping up? I think there's a couple of reasons. One, Myanmar is out of sight, out of mind to most of the world. It's the invisible crisis. But I frankly think that there's something else at play here. And I served in political office for a dozen years, and I'm sensitive to these developments. And that is this: I believe it's pretty obvious as I do my work that there are headwinds out there that are working against political headwinds, working against human rights and working against humanitarian aid. They're being driven by the political weapons of xenophobia, of racism, the use of the fear card, of the grievance card. And so people are becoming more fearful of the world, and they are becoming less willing to support their governments going out and helping do the right thing by supporting human rights and supporting humanitarian aid. And I think what is critically important for us when we address member states of the United Nations, governments of the United Nations, is to realize that they are functioning inside of political environments. And they are able to function and have the maneuverability insofar as those environments allow them to. And those environments are becoming increasingly toxic to what I certainly care a lot about and what I think is the very foundation of the United Nations. You know, we have seen this movie before. We have seen the outcome of the use of these very powerful weapons, the xenophobia and fear and grievance. We've also seen what happens when, as we're seeing now, decreases in humanitarian aid to the world and increases in weaponization around the world. These United Nations was founded 80 years ago on the ashes of the consequence of those forces. So we know how this ends. And it's incumbent upon us, I believe, to recognize this now and to take steps, all of us, not just member states, but all of us, to create the political conditions that would be conducive to member states doing the right thing. Sorry for that very long-winded answer.
Any other questions in the room? No, I don't see any online. If you can put them in the chat or one in the room, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the briefing and for sharing these very important insights. Mona Abtul from Al-Quds Al-Arabi. You know, a very big part of what's happening in Myanmar is rooted in religious and ethnic prejudice against Muslim communities. So what is, in your opinion, what is the role of education in mitigating the violence that's happening, and what is the UN doing to implement such initiatives? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Education is obviously critical, and the UN is not doing enough. And I think part of this is because of the constraints that the UN is increasingly under. Member states are less and less willing to not only provide for humanitarian aid and support for human rights, but support for these United Nations. So it is declining. And speaking of a Muslim minority, the Rohingya ethnic minority in Myanmar were the victims of genocide. And 1.2 million of them are in Bangladesh right now, living in incredible conditions. And in Rakhine State, even as we speak, there is violence that is causing even more Rohingya to cross the border into Bangladesh. This has to be addressed. These attacks have to be addressed. Accountability has to be insisted upon. The international community has to be paying attention, much greater attention, to a crisis such as this. There was an international conference here, a high-level conference just a month ago on this very subject. But the question is, what happens beyond a conference? What kind of investments are going to be made for the education of these of these young people who are caught between a rock and a hard place. There have been some countries have stepped up to increase the amount of money that they're going to be providing for the Rohingya, for example. But it's simply not enough. And we need to work very, very hard to advance and advocate for those young people, for the UN and the world to not ignore them.
Thank you. We don't have any questions online, so unless there's any more in the room, that will end the briefing. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Mr. Andrews.
Thank you.